The grand station hung in the darkness of space like a jewel among the stars. Inside its massive halls, representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to discuss matters of war, peace, and prosperity. Princess Valara of the Kethran Empire walked through those halls alone, her purple robes trailing behind her, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her every step. She was not supposed to be here. Not like this. Not as a disgrace. Valara's people, the Kethrans, were known throughout the galaxy for their powerful psychic abilities. They could read thoughts, move objects with their minds, and communicate across vast distances without speaking a word. These gifts made them respected, feared, and influential. But Valara possessed none of these abilities. She was born different, born wrong according to her people. A genetic mutation had left her mind silent, unable to touch the psychic currents that flowed through every other member of her race. Her father, Emperor Theron, had hidden this shame for years. But when the council demanded a Kethran representative, he saw an opportunity. He sent Valara not to honor her, but to be rid of her. Let the galaxy see his broken daughter. Let them mock her instead of him. The council chambers were enormous, with seats arranged in circular tiers that rose toward a domed ceiling. Each species had their designated area, marked by holographic symbols that floated in the air. Valara found the Kethran section and took her seat, aware of the stares from every direction. The reptilian Draknir delegation sat to her left. Their scales gleamed under the lights, and their yellow eyes tracked her movements with undisguised contempt. To her right, the crystalline Valorians refracted light through their transparent bodies, deliberately angling themselves away from her as if she carried a disease. Even her own attendants, two lower-ranking Kethrans assigned to assist her, kept their distance. They stood at the edge of the platform, their faces carefully blank, but Valara could see the disgust in their eyes. She had seen that look all her life. The session began with routine business. Trade agreements, border disputes, minor infractions of galactic law. Valara listened carefully, taking notes on a datapad. She might be unwanted, but she would not give anyone reason to say she failed in her duties. Then Ambassador Crix of the Draknir stood. He was large even for his species, his scales a deep crimson that marked him as a warrior caste. His voice boomed through the chamber as he addressed the assembly. "I must raise a concern about the Kethran delegation," Crix said, his forked tongue flicking between his teeth. "We have always respected the Empire and its representatives. But this," he gestured toward Valara with one clawed hand, "this is an insult to the entire council." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Valara's hands tightened on her datapad, but she kept her expression neutral. She had expected this. She had been preparing for this moment since she arrived. "The Gethrans send us a defective," Crix continued, the words striking like a physical blow. "A princess who cannot even perform the most basic functions of her own species. What message does this send? That we are not worthy of their true attention? That our business here is so unimportant they can send us their refuse?" Laughter echoed through the chamber. Not from everyone, but from enough. The Draknir delegation hissed their amusement. Several other species joined in, their various forms of mockery creating a chorus of humiliation. Valara stood slowly. She had prepared a response, carefully worded phrases that acknowledged the concern while defending her position. But before she could speak, a voice cut through the noise. "That's enough." The laughter died. Every eye turned toward the source of the interruption. A human stood at the edge of the chamber floor. He wore the dark blue uniform of the Terran Coalition, with silver insignia on his shoulders that marked him as a commander. He was tall for his species, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His name was Jake Morrison, and he had arrived at the station only a week ago as Earth's military liaison. Humans were still relatively new to galactic politics. Their planet had joined the Council less than a decade ago, and most established species viewed them as primitive newcomers who should learn their place before speaking. Jake walked toward the center of the floor, his boots echoing in the silence. He stopped directly in front of Ambassador Crix, apparently unconcerned that the Drachnir towered over him by more than a foot. "Ambassador Crix," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite speaking at normal volume. "I've been studying the Council's charter since I arrived. It's quite detailed about many things. But nowhere in those documents does it say that a person's worth is determined by whether they possess specific biological traits." Crix's eyes narrowed. "You are new here, human. You do not understand our ways." "Maybe not," Jake replied. "But I understand discrimination when I see it. And I understand that judging someone based on what they can't do, rather than what they can do, is beneath what this council claims to represent." "How dare you?" one of the Valorian representatives chimed in, their crystalline voice ringing like bells. "You presume to lecture us? Your species has been among the stars for barely a moment." Jake turned to face the Valorian. "That's true. We're new. But that means we still remember what it's like to be judged unfairly, to be told we don't belong. And we remember how wrong those judgments were." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of worlds. "Princess Valara is here as a legitimate representative of the Kethran Empire. If you have concerns about her credentials, raise them through proper channels. But this public mockery? This serves no purpose except cruelty." The chamber erupted in argument. Some delegates supported Jake's words. Others were outraged at his presumption. The session devolved into chaos until the council chairman called for a recess. As the delegates filed out, Valara remained in her seat, shaking slightly from the adrenaline coursing through her body. She had not asked for the human's defense. She did not know what to make of it. Jake approached her platform. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though his expression now was serious. "Princess Valara," he said, offering a slight bow that acknowledged her rank without the exaggerated deference others used mockingly. "I'm Commander Jake Morrison. I apologize if I overstepped, but I couldn't sit silent." Valara studied him carefully. "Why would you defend me? You don't know me. And by aligning yourself with me, you risk your own standing here." Jake smiled slightly. "Where I come from, we have a saying. When you see someone being pushed down, you either help them up or you're part of the problem. I prefer to help." "Your words will change nothing," Valara said quietly. "They will still see me as defective." "Maybe, but you're not, and I think you know that. The question is whether you're going to let their opinions define you." Before Valara could respond, Jake pulled out a small data chip. "This contains access codes to the station's observation deck. It's usually restricted. The military liaisons have clearance. It's quiet there, peaceful. If you ever need a place to think away from all this," he gestured at the empty chamber, "feel free to use it." He placed the chip on the platform edge and turned to leave. "Commander Morrison," Valara called after him. He paused and looked back. "Thank you." Jake nodded once, then walked away, leaving Valara alone with her thoughts and a small chip that represented something she had not felt in a very long time: hope. 3 weeks passed, and the station continued its endless cycle of meetings, debates, and political maneuvering. Valara attended every session, took detailed notes, and said little. The other delegates had mostly stopped their open mockery after Jake's intervention, but the contempt remained in their eyes and their whispers. She used the observation deck often. The vast window looked out into space, showing stars and nebulae in colors that took her breath away. It became her refuge, a place where she could be alone without feeling lonely. Except she wasn't always alone. Jake came there too, usually late in the station's artificial night cycle. At first, they simply nodded to each other in acknowledgement. Then one night, Jake brought 2 containers of what he called coffee, a human beverage. He offered one to Valara. "It's bitter," he warned, "but it helps when you can't sleep." Valara accepted the container carefully. The liquid was dark and steaming. She took a small sip and immediately regretted it. The taste was horrible. Jake laughed at her expression. "Yeah, it's an acquired taste. Here." He pulled out a small packet of sweetener. "This helps." They sat in comfortable silence, looking at the stars. Finally, Jake spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." Valara nodded. "What's it like? Being the only one of your kind who can't do what everyone else can?" Most people avoided this question, as if her condition was too shameful to mention. But Jake's tone held only curiosity, no judgment. "Lonely," Valara said quietly. "From childhood, I knew I was different. Other Kethran children could hear each other's thoughts, play games in the psychic currents. I could only watch. My tutors tried everything to unlock my abilities. Meditation, drugs, neural stimulation. Nothing worked." She paused, staring at her reflection in the window. "Eventually, they stopped trying. I became invisible, even when standing in plain sight." "That sounds incredibly isolating." "It was. It is." Valara set down her coffee. "But I learned to adapt. I studied harder than anyone else. History, law, languages, science. If I couldn't have power in the traditional way, I would find it elsewhere. Knowledge became my weapon." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "On Earth, we have people born with conditions that make them different too. For a long time, society treated them terribly. But we learned slowly that different doesn't mean lesser. Some of our greatest minds came from people who thought differently than everyone else. Is that why you defended me? Because of your Earth values?" "Partly. But also because it was wrong and someone needed to say so." Jake looked at her directly. "You belong here as much as anyone else, Valara. More than most, actually. I've been watching the sessions. You pay attention to everything. You see connections others miss." Valara felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. They began meeting regularly at the observation deck. Jake told her about Earth, about humanity's struggles to earn respect among species that had traveled the stars for millennia. He spoke of wars and peace, of mistakes and triumphs, of the stubborn human tendency to keep going, even when everything seemed impossible. Valara shared stories of Kethran history that weren't in the official records. Ancient poems about stars and time. Her secret dream of proving herself worthy not despite her differences, but because of them. Their friendship did not go unnoticed. Other delegations whispered about it with amusement and scorn. The broken princess and the primitive human, how fitting they should find each other. Jake's own staff questioned whether associating with Valara was wise for Earth's reputation. Jake ignored them all. Valara found herself caring less about their opinions with each passing day. The turning point came during a crisis that threatened to engulf 3 sectors in war. The Torvan Dominion, the Harvick Alliance, and the independent Rim colonies had been disputing control of a resource-rich region for decades. Tensions had finally reached a breaking point. Warships were mobilizing. Colonies were evacuating. The council met in emergency session, trying to find a solution, but every proposed solution favored one party over the others. The major powers of the council each backed different sides based on their own interests. The Draknir supported the Torvan. The Valorians backed the Harvick. Smaller species were caught in the middle, afraid to take sides. The debates went in circles for days. Valara listened to every argument, reviewed every historical claim, studied every map. Late one night, alone in her quarters, she noticed something in the ancient star charts that no one else had mentioned. The disputed region had once been a neutral trade zone established by treaty over 300 years ago. That treaty had never been formally dissolved, merely forgotten as the original signatories faded into history. The trade routes established by that treaty gave all three current claimants legitimate historical access to the region. Working through the night, Valara developed a proposal. Reinstate the neutral zone under modern terms. Establish a joint administration with representation from all three parties. Guarantee access to resources for everyone based on population needs rather than military strength. Use the ancient trade routes as the foundation for new economic partnerships that would make cooperation more profitable than conflict. It was elegant. It honored history while addressing current concerns. But Valara stared at her completed proposal with doubt gnawing at her. Who would listen to her? She was the broken princess, the disgrace. If she brought this forward and it was rejected with mockery, she would only prove her father right about her worthlessness. She brought the proposal to Jake the next evening. He read through it carefully, his expression growing more impressed with each page. "This is brilliant," he said finally. "This could actually work. Have you presented it to the council yet?" "No, Valara's voice faltered. "I don't think they would listen to me." Jake set down the datapad and looked at her seriously. "Valara, this proposal could prevent a war. Thousands, maybe millions of lives are at stake. You have to present this. They'll laugh at me. They'll dismiss it without consideration simply because I'm the one saying it. Maybe. But what if they don't? What if this is the solution everyone's been looking for, and you're the only one who saw it?" Jake leaned forward. "I'll tell you what. When you present this, I'll be standing right beside you. Anyone who wants to silence you will have to deal with me first." Valara felt tears threatening to form. In her entire life, no one had ever stood beside her. Not her family, not her people, not anyone. The idea that this human, this relative stranger, would put himself at risk for her was almost incomprehensible. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Jake smiled. "Because you're my friend. And because I believe in you, even if you don't believe in yourself yet." The next day, Valara requested time to address the council. The announcement was met with groans and dismissive comments. The chairman, eager to move past the deadlock, reluctantly agreed to give her 10 minutes. When the time came, Valara walked to the center of the chamber floor. Her legs felt weak. Her hands trembled as she held her datapad. Every eye in the chamber was on her, most filled with skepticism or contempt. Then Jake stood from the human delegation area and walked to stand beside her. He said nothing, made no grand gesture. He simply stood there, his hand resting casually on the ceremonial blade that human military officers carried. A quiet statement that anyone who wished to interrupt her would answer to him. Valara took a deep breath and began to speak. She explained the historical precedent, the ancient treaties, the forgotten trade routes. She showed maps and economic projections. She demonstrated how her proposal served everyone's interests better than continued conflict. The chamber grew quiet as delegates realized what they were hearing. This wasn't the rambling of a desperate outcast. This was solid, thoughtful policy backed by extensive research and historical knowledge. When she finished, silence hung in the air for a long moment. Then, representative from the Rim colonies stood. "I move that we study this proposal in detail." The Torvan ambassador stood. Seconded. Even the Harvick delegation, after a whispered conference, indicated their willingness to consider the framework. The vote was called. The proposal passed for further consideration. Valara felt dizzy with disbelief. Jake touched her shoulder gently. "See?" he said quietly. You just needed someone to stand beside you until you could see your own strength. For the first time in her life, Valara had proven her worth on her own terms. And she had done it not by being what others wanted, but by being exactly who she was. Success brought unexpected consequences. Valara's proposal was being refined and implemented, preventing what could have been a devastating regional war. The council praised her work, though some did so through gritted teeth. For the first time, delegates from various species sought her opinion on matters. She was becoming respected, but respect breeds enemies faster than failure ever could. The Draknir delegation was furious. Ambassador Crix had been quietly profiting from the instability in the disputed region through weapons, contracts, and resource speculation. Peace meant the end of those profits. He was not alone. Several other delegates had similar interests in maintaining conflict rather than resolving it. Valara noticed a change in atmosphere immediately. Crix no longer mocked her openly. Instead, he watched her with cold calculation. Other delegates who had financial stakes in various conflicts began voting as a bloc, opposing peaceful resolutions to disputes that should have been easily settled. She shared her concerns with Jake during one of their evening meetings at the observation deck. "Something's wrong," she said, showing him voting records on her datapad. "Look at these patterns. Delegates from different species with different political philosophies, all voting the same way on matters related to conflict resolution. It makes no sense unless they're coordinating." Jake studied the data carefully. His military training had included intelligence analysis, and he saw what Valara was seeing. "You think there's a conspiracy? I think some delegates profit from war more than peace. And I think my success threatened their interests." Before they could discuss it further, Valara's communication device chimed. A message marked urgent and encrypted. She opened it carefully. The message was from her younger sister, Princess Ciara. Unlike Valara, Ciara possessed powerful psychic abilities and was favored by their father. But she was also kind, one of the few family members who had never treated Valara with contempt. The message was brief and alarming. Their father planned to recall Valara from the station, but not to honor her success. Instead, he intended to marry her to Lord Vex, a Draknir nobleman and close ally of Ambassador Crix. The marriage would cement a political alliance between the Kethran Empire and the Draknir Confederation. It would also conveniently silence Valara and remove her from galactic politics. Valara read the message 3 times, feeling her brief moment of hope crumbling. She showed it to Jake without speaking. Jake's jaw tightened as he read. "This is wrong. After everything you've accomplished, they want to use you as a bargaining chip?" "I'm a princess," Valara said bitterly. "That's what princesses are for. Political alliances through marriage. At least this time they found someone willing to take the defective one. Don't call yourself that." Jake's voice was sharp. "And you don't have to go along with this. What choice do I have? If I refuse, I shame my family. I could start a political incident. And even if I stay here, my credentials as ambassador come from my father. He can revoke them at any time." Jake was silent for a moment, thinking. Then he looked at her with an expression she had come to recognize. It was the look he got when he was planning something that would probably get him in trouble. "What if we had leverage?" he said. "What if we could prove that these delegates, including Crix, are actively sabotaging peace efforts for profit? If we expose that, your father couldn't afford to ally with them. Do you have proof?" "Not yet, but I know how to find it." Jake stood up, suddenly energized. "I have access to station security systems through my military liaison position. Financial records are harder, but there are monitoring protocols for suspicious transactions. If these delegates are coordinating, they're leaving traces." Over the following weeks, Jake investigated quietly. He reviewed communication logs, financial transfers, and shipping manifests. What he found was worse than they had imagined. The conspiracy involved dozens of delegates from multiple species. They had been deliberately sabotaging peace negotiations across several sectors for years. They manipulated intelligence reports to make conflicts seem more complicated than they were. They funded extremist groups on multiple worlds to keep tensions high. They even arranged false flag attacks to restart conflicts that were near resolution. The evidence was damning. But when Jake brought it to his superiors in the Terran Coalition Military Command, he was met with resistance. "This is too big," his commanding officer said over a secure video link. "You're accusing ambassadors from some of the most powerful species in the galaxy. Even if you're right, we can't act on this. Humanity doesn't have the political capital to make these accusations. We'd be seen as troublemakers, maybe even expelled from the council. So we just let it continue?" Jake demanded. "We let them start wars for profit? We wait. We build more evidence. We work through proper diplomatic channels." "That's an order, Commander." Jake disconnected the call and slammed his fist on the desk in frustration. Valara, who had been listening from across the room, approached him slowly. "They're afraid," she said. "Your leaders are afraid of the consequences. They're not wrong to be afraid. If we do this wrong, it could destroy Earth's relationship with the entire Council." Jake ran his hand through his hair. "But if we do nothing, how many people die in conflicts that could have been prevented?" Valara made a decision then. She had spent her entire life being afraid. Afraid of not measuring up, afraid of disappointing her family, afraid of taking risks. That fear had kept her safe, but it also kept her powerless. "We expose them anyway," she said firmly. "We find a way to make the truth public that cannot be ignored or suppressed." Jake looked at her in surprise. "That's career suicide for both of us. Maybe worse. Perhaps. But it's the right thing to do." Valara met his eyes. "You stood beside me when no one else would. You gave me the courage to believe in myself. Now let me stand beside you." A slow smile spread across Jake's face. "All right then. Let's burn it all down." They began planning carefully. They needed to present the evidence in a way that couldn't be dismissed or buried by the powerful delegations involved. The Grand Assembly was coming in 2 weeks, a gathering attended by representatives from all member species and broadcast across the galaxy. If they could present the evidence there, in front of everyone, the conspiracy couldn't be covered up, but they would need allies. Jake approached Lieutenant Kyle Manning, his second in command. Kyle was young but reliable, and had been disturbed by the orders to stand down from the investigation. "I'm asking you to potentially throw away your career," Jake told him honestly. "If this goes wrong, we'll all face court-martial at minimum." Kyle thought for only a moment. "Sir, I joined the service to protect people. If we don't do this, we're protecting the wrong ones." "I'm in." Valara recruited allies as well. Zenith, a Valorian scientist who had worked with her on the territorial dispute resolution, agreed to help after reviewing the evidence. Despite her species' typical aloofness, Zenith had a strong sense of justice. The most surprising ally came from an unexpected source. Dren was a Drachnir, warrior who had been assigned as security for Ambassador Crix. But Dren came from the old, warrior tradition that valued honor above profit. When he learned what his own delegation was doing, he was horrified. "This Sham is my people," he said, his scales flushing dark with anger. "The Drachnir were once known as fierce but honorable. Now we're just merchants of death. I will help you expose this corruption." With their small team assembled, they prepared their presentation. Zenith would handle the technical aspects, ensuring the evidence was displayed in a way that couldn't be dismissed as fabricated. Dren would provide testimony from inside the conspiracy. Kyle would make sure the broadcast continued no matter what security measures were taken. And Valara would be the one to present it all, with Jake standing beside her. The night before the Grand Assembly, Valara couldn't sleep. She stood at the observation deck, looking at the stars and thinking about everything that could go wrong. They could be arrested. The evidence could be dismissed. The powerful delegates might turn this against them, claiming it was a conspiracy by the humans and the Broken Princess to gain power. Jake found her there, as she knew he would. Having second thoughts? He asked gently. Many thoughts, but not about whether to go through with it. Valara turned to face him. Jake, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. You gave me back my life. Before you, I was just existing, just surviving. You made me believe I could be more than what others said I was. Thank you for that. Jake took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. You did the same for me. I came here thinking I was just going to follow orders and play politics. You reminded me what actually matters. We make each other better, Valara. That's what friends do. Friends, Valara repeated softly. The word felt insufficient for what she felt, but it would do for now. They stood together in the starlight, gathering their courage for the battle ahead. The Grand Assembly met in the largest chamber on the station, a vast space that could accommodate thousands of delegates and observers. Every member species sent representatives. Holographic cameras floated throughout the chamber, transmitting the proceedings across the galaxy. This was the council at its most formal and most watched. Valara sat in the Kethran section, her heart pounding so hard she thought others might hear it. Jake sat with the human delegation, but his eyes frequently found hers across the chamber, offering silent encouragement. Kyle was positioned in the security observation room, ready to override any attempts to cut the broadcast. Zenith waited with her holographic equipment. Dren stood with the Draknir delegation, his face carved from stone, revealing nothing. The assembly began with ceremonial speeches and procedural matters. Valara had submitted a formal request to address the assembly, which had been grudgingly approved. She was scheduled near the end of the session, a time when many delegates would be tired and inattentive. That was fine. She needed them all present, even if they weren't paying attention at first. Finally, the chairman called her name. The assembly recognizes Princess Valara of the Kethran Empire. Valara stood and walked to the central platform. The enormous chamber seemed to press in on her from all sides. Thousands of eyes watched her, most with curiosity about what the Broken Princess might say at such an important gathering. She reached the center and activated her datapad. The large holographic displays around the chamber flickered to life, ready to show whatever she chose to present. Honored delegates, she began, her voice amplified throughout the chamber. I come before you today not as a princess, but as someone who believes in the ideals this council was founded upon. Peace, cooperation, and justice for all species. Some delegates shifted in their seats, already bored. They expected another idealistic speech from the naive princess. Valara took a breath. But those ideals have been betrayed. For years, certain members of this council have been actively sabotaging peace efforts across multiple sectors. They have profited from war while pretending to support peace. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted questions and denials. The chairman called for order, his voice barely heard over the chaos. Valara continued speaking, her voice steady. I have evidence. Financial records showing payments from weapons manufacturers to sitting ambassadors. Communication logs showing coordination between delegates who publicly support opposite sides of conflicts. Shipping manifests proving that council members have been funding extremist groups. Zenith activated her equipment. The holographic displays began showing documents, messages, and transaction records. The evidence scrolled past, page after page, building an undeniable pattern of corruption. Ambassador Crix rose from his seat, his voice booming. This is outrageous. These are fabrications designed to discredit the council. Chairman, I demand this farce be ended immediately." Other delegates involved in the conspiracy joined their voices to his, calling for Valara to be removed, claiming the evidence was fake, demanding an end to this slander. The chairman looked uncertain. This was far beyond normal assembly procedure. He moved to order security to escort Valara from the platform. That's when Jake stood. He walked calmly from the human delegation area toward the central platform. Kyle Manning and 3 other human security personnel followed him. They formed a protective semicircle around Valara, not threatening anyone, but making it clear that removing her would require going through them. "The princess has the right to address this assembly," Jake said clearly. "That right is guaranteed in the council charter. Unless you're planning to violate your own laws," she speaks. Dren stepped forward from the Draknir section. His massive form moved to stand with the humans. "I am Dren, warrior of the Draknir Confederation. I have served Ambassador Crix for 3 years. Everything Princess Valara says is true. I have witnessed his meetings with weapons dealers. I have carried messages arranging for conflicts to be prolonged. My people's honor has been stained by these actions, and I will not stand silent while it continues." The chamber descended into chaos again. Some delegates called for the arrest of everyone on the platform. Others demanded to see more evidence. Junior diplomats from various delegations began arguing with their own ambassadors, clearly shocked by the revelations. Zenith continued projecting evidence. Financial transactions, intercepted communications, testimony from witnesses across multiple worlds. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming and impossible to dismiss as mere fabrication. Valara raised her voice above the noise. "This conspiracy involves delegates from the Draknir Confederation, the Valorian Collective, the Hagren Unity, and even some members of my own Kethran Empire. They have been manipulating conflicts in the Torvan region, the Harvek territories, the Rim colonies, and at least 7 other sectors. Thousands have died in wars that could have been prevented. Millions more live in fear of conflicts that are artificially maintained for profit. Lies." Crix roared. He turned to the Draknir security forces stationed around the chamber. "Arrest them all. The human and his soldiers, the traitor Dren, and the broken princess. Arrest them for treason against the council." Several security personnel moved forward, but they stopped when Kyle's voice came over the chamber's communication system from his position in the security center. "Attention all security forces. I am Lieutenant Kyle Manning of the Terran Coalition. Be advised that this entire proceeding is being broadcast live across the galaxy. Every world, every station, every ship with a receiver is watching this right now. Any action you take will be witnessed by billions. Choose carefully." The security personnel hesitated, caught between orders and the knowledge that the whole galaxy was indeed watching. The holographic cameras continued recording everything. A delegate from a smaller species stood up, his voice shaking but determined. "I want to see the evidence regarding the Harvik conflict. My world lost thousands in that war. If what the princess says is true, we deserve to know." Another voice joined. "Show us the evidence from the Torvan region." More delegates began demanding to see specific evidence. The junior diplomats, those who had not been part of the conspiracy, were beginning to overwhelm their own corrupt leaders. Crix realized he was losing control of the situation. His eyes, filled with cold rage, found Valara on the platform. He made a small gesture to someone in the gallery above. Jake saw the movement, and his military training instantly recognized it as a signal. He looked up and spotted a Draknir operative in the gallery, raising a weapon. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The operative aimed at Valara. Jake's body moved before his mind fully registered the threat. He threw himself in front of her just as the energy weapon discharged. The blast hit Jake in the shoulder and chest. His armor absorbed some of the impact, but not all. The smell of burned material and flesh filled the air as he collapsed. Valara caught him as he fell, lowering him to the platform floor. "Jake!" Her voice was raw with panic and fear. Blood seeped through the cracks in his damaged armor. His breathing was labored, and his eyes struggled to focus. Valara pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but she knew it wasn't enough. He was dying. Something broke inside her. All her life, she had been told she was broken, defective, lacking something essential that made her truly Catherine. But in that moment, with Jake's life slipping away under her hands, she didn't care about psychic abilities or her father's disappointment or any of it. She only cared about saving the person who had stood beside her when no one else would. And then something awakened. It wasn't like the psychic abilities other Catherines described. It wasn't a connection to some universal current or a sense of expanded consciousness. It was simpler and more profound. It was the desperate need to save someone she cared about more than herself. Energy flowed from somewhere deep inside her, through her hands into Jake's broken body. She could feel his heart struggling, his lungs filling with fluid, his systems shutting down. And she could feel herself somehow holding those systems together, giving them the strength to keep fighting. Around them, the chamber had erupted in complete chaos. Station security was arresting the operative who had fired. Other security forces were moving to detain Crix and the other delegates implicated in the conspiracy. Medical teams were rushing toward the platform, but Valara heard none of it. Her entire focus was on the connection she had formed with Jake. This impossible ability she had never possessed, suddenly manifesting because she needed it to. Because he needed it, Zenith reached the platform first. The Valorian's crystalline form refracted light in patterns that indicated deep concern. "Valara, medical teams are coming. You need to let them." "No," Valara said, her voice distant. "I can feel him. I can help him. I just need." She didn't know what she needed. She was operating on pure instinct, on emotion, on something that had no name. The medical teams arrived with emergency equipment. They tried to gently move Valara aside, but she refused to break contact with Jake. Finally, the lead medic, a being from a species known for their healing abilities, studied what Valara was doing. "She's stabilizing him," the medic said in wonder. "I've never seen a..." The medical facility was quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Jake had been moved there after being stabilized, and for 3 days, he drifted between consciousness and sleep while his body healed. Valara rarely left his side. She sat in a chair next to his bed, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching him breathe, grateful for each rise and fall of his chest. The station beyond the medical facility was in turmoil. The conspiracy's exposure had sent shockwaves through galactic politics. Delegates were being arrested. Governments were falling. Emergency councils were being called. The Galactic Council itself was undergoing massive restructuring. As the corrupt members were removed and new protocols were established to prevent such widespread corruption from taking root again. But Valara heard about it all secondhand. Her world had narrowed to this room and the human who had taken a blast meant for her. On the 4th day, Jake woke fully, his eyes clear and focused. He looked at Valara and smiled weakly. "You look terrible," he said, his voice rough but tinged with humor. "When's the last time you slept?" "Says the man who was shot," Valara replied. But she was smiling too, relief washing over her. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a plasma blast." Jake tried to sit up and winced. "Which I did. The doctors tell me I should be dead. They say you saved my life." Valara looked down at her hands. "I don't understand how I did it. All my life, I couldn't access the psychic abilities that every Catherine is born with. But when you were dying, something just awakened." Zenith, who had been consulting with the medical team, entered the room. The Valorian's crystalline form sparkled in the light. "I believe I understand what happened," Zenith said. "I've been studying Catherine's psychic abilities and comparing them to what Valara did. Traditional Catherine training focuses on control, discipline, and connection to what they call the universal current. But Valara's neurology is different. She cannot access abilities that way." "Then how did she do it?" Jake asked. "Emotion," Zenith explained. "Specifically, strong emotional connection to another being. Most Catherines are trained from childhood to suppress emotion in favor of mental discipline. But Valara's different brain structure means she needed a different trigger. When she felt the desperate need to save you, when her emotional connection to you became strong enough, it bypassed the traditional pathways and created new ones. Valara processed this information slowly. So, I was never broken. I just needed to find my own way." Exactly. The Catherine approach to psychic development isn't universal. It works for most, but not all. Your people's refusal to accept variation in how abilities manifest meant they labeled you as defective rather than different. Zenith's form flickered with colors that indicated approval. "You're actually quite remarkable. The way you use your abilities was more precise and powerful than most trained Catherines could manage." Over the following weeks, Jake recovered. His healing was faster than expected, partly due to advanced medicine and partly because Valara discovered she could help accelerate the process with her newly awakened abilities. She practiced carefully, learning to sense biological systems and support them without overwhelming them. The political situation continued to evolve rapidly. Ambassador Crix and 17 other delegates were formally expelled from the council and faced criminal charges in their home governments. The weapons manufacturers and other corporations involved in the conspiracy were being investigated. Several smaller conflicts that had been artificially maintained began moving toward genuine peace negotiations. Humanity's role in exposing the conspiracy had earned Earth significant respect. No longer were humans seen as primitive newcomers. They had proven themselves willing to stand up for what was right, even against powerful opposition. The Terran Coalition was offered an expanded role in the Council, including a permanent seat on the newly reformed Security Directorate. Jake was promoted to captain and offered command of a new initiative, a joint species peacekeeping force designed to prevent the kind of corruption they had exposed. It would be a challenging position, requiring him to work with representatives from multiple species, but it would keep him at the station. Valara received communication from her father, Emperor Theron. She expected recrimination for the embarrassment she had caused. Instead, the message was carefully neutral. The Emperor acknowledged her success in exposing the conspiracy. He noted that the planned marriage alliance with the Draknir was no longer possible given Lord Vex's family connections. To the disgraced Ambassador Crix, he offered her the position of permanent Catherine Ambassador to the Galactic Council. It was not an apology. Theron was incapable of admitting he had been wrong about his daughter, but it was recognition, in his way, that she had value after all. Valara drafted her response carefully. She would accept the ambassadorship, but on her terms. She would represent the Catherine Empire honestly and with integrity, not as a puppet following orders from home. She would use her position to advocate for reform, both in galactic politics and within Catherine society itself. And she would not hide who she was or pretend to be something she wasn't to make others comfortable. She sent the message and waited for the response. When it came, her father had agreed to all her terms. He had no choice. Valara had become a symbol across the galaxy. Young people from dozens of species who felt constrained by their society's expectations looked to her as inspiration. The Emperor could not afford to silence her now. One evening, as Jake was finally cleared to leave the medical facility, he and Valara went to the observation deck. It had been their refuge throughout everything, and it felt right to return there now. They stood side by side, looking out at the stars. Jake's arm was still in a support brace, and he moved carefully, but he was healing well. "So," Jake said, "Captain of a peacekeeping force. That's going to be interesting. And I'm to be a permanent ambassador," Valara added, "representing a people who spent my entire life telling me I wasn't good enough to represent them." Things change. People change. Sometimes the galaxy changes too, if you push hard enough. Jake looked at her. "Are you happy with how things turned out?" Valara considered the question carefully. "Happy is a complicated word. I'm satisfied that we did the right thing. I'm grateful to be alive and that you're alive. I'm hopeful for the future in a way I never was before." That's a good start. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Valara spoke again, her voice softer. "Among my people, there's an old saying from before we developed our psychic abilities, from when we were still learning to read the stars. Stars shine brightest in the darkest void. It means that beauty and hope can exist even in the emptiest, loneliest places." She turned to face Jake directly. "I was lost in darkness for so long. Spurned by my family, rejected by my people, invisible even when standing in plain sight. I thought the darkness was all there was for me. But then you stood beside me. You became my light when I couldn't see my own." Jake took her hand gently. "You were always the star, Valara. You always had that light inside you. I just stood beside you until you could see it yourself." "And now?" Valara asked. "What happens now? Now we do our jobs. You'll be an amazing ambassador. I'll try not to get shot while running a peacekeeping force. And we'll keep fighting for the things that matter." Jake smiled. "And we'll do it together, if you want. I want that very much." They stood together, looking out at the infinite expanse of space. The future stretched before them, uncertain and full of challenges. There would be more battles to fight, more corruption to expose, more people who would doubt them or try to tear them down. But they had faced the worst and survived. They had stood together against overwhelming opposition and won. And they had proven that sometimes the most unlikely alliances become the strongest bonds. Valara felt something she had never experienced before. Not just hope, not just satisfaction, but genuine contentment. She had found her place in the galaxy. Not the place others assigned to her, but the one she had claimed for herself. The broken princess was broken no more. She was whole in ways that had nothing to do with psychic abilities or royal bloodlines. She was whole because she had learned her worth, because she had found someone who saw her value when no one else did, and because she had chosen to stand up and fight for what was right. God, and beside her stood the human warrior who had started it all with a simple act of decency, who had defended her when she couldn't defend herself, and who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. The galaxy had changed, but more importantly, they had changed. And together, they would continue changing it, one small act of courage at a time. In the observation deck, surrounded by the light of distant stars, Valara and Jake stood side by side, facing the future together. Two souls who had found each other across the vastness of space, proving that hope can bloom in the darkest places, and that friendship, loyalty, and courage are universal languages that transcend species and circumstance. The Spurned princess had found her hope. The human warrior had found his purpose. And both had found something more precious than either could have imagined. They had found each other. Outside the observation deck window, the stars continued their eternal dance. Some were being born, blazing into existence with brilliant fury.